Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. We have a very important topic to discuss with a very special guest coming from Harvard University. She's a fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School right now and the dean at the School of Social Sciences in the University of Lahore, Dr. Rabia Akhtar. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Tafat.
Thank you. So today, let's talk a little bit about the issue at home, climate change, and national security. There's a lot of debate around the world, and again, I think U.S., UK, a lot of other government and their military institutions adapting to the changing climate, how they can keep their military bases in adapting to the changing climate, and that is the issue becoming more and more threatened or urgent at the global level. And Pakistan, as you know, is the number one most affected country in the world by climate change, and even though we contribute less than 1% in carbon emissions. So today we're going to have a discussion on climate change and national security with the perspective of South Asia, particularly. So, Dr. Rabi Akhtar, my first question to you would be how do you see climate change acting as a threat multiplier in South Asia? And what are the most pressing security concerns linked to climate change in the region?
Thank you so much, Dr. Tafak, for using the word threat multiplier. It is the most critical thing here. Climate change is not just an environmental problem. It is a security problem. And I would like us in South Asia to change the narrative around it. Simply calling it as an environmental problem is not going to help us.
Yes.
In South Asia specifically, it does act as a threat multiplier, meaning that it takes existing vulnerabilities and it makes them worse. This region already faces political instability. It has resource scarcity. It has cross-border tensions, and climate change exacerbates all of these across the board.
Yes.
So, for example, take extreme weather events, cyclones, floods, droughts. We have had these in all countries in South Asia, and these are becoming frequent and intense, and it displaces communities and creates new humanitarian crises. Countries like Pakistan and Bangladesh, we have large populations living in climate vulnerable areas, are absolutely at risk. So when livelihoods are destroyed, it can lead to increased migration, which in turn strains urban infrastructure, and it further fuels tensions. There's also an economic dimension to this. Climate-induced agriculture failures or energy disruptions can heighten domestic unrest, and we have seen that leading to political instability. So we cannot ignore how climate stress impacts military preparedness. Forces have to divert their resources to disaster response instead of national defense. So I believe that South Asia is dealing with an interconnected web of challenges where climate change isn't happening in isolation. So we need to stop looking at it in isolation. It is amplifying economic, political, and military risks in ways that we are only beginning to grasp. So the sooner we understand this linkage between climate change and security, we would be able to devise better strategies to deal with it and make our environment more resilient and adopt sustainable practices.
Yes, because South Asia is a very special place, as you said, it's very vulnerable to climate change, and as you know, we have the second highest number of glaciers in the region, in the Himalayas region, and our forces are always, on the top. And when these glaciers are gonna melting, the sea level is gonna rise, and what's gonna happen? It's gonna be catastrophic and devastating, not for the communities or the cities, but it's gonna be devastating for the whole countries. So, as you know, one of the issues remains in that region unsolved, or maybe it has been solved, so called, but not fully. Water scarcity issue, right? So it's a growing issue because our water, especially in Pakistan, is kind of coming from India, from Kashmir region, and particularly in region dependent on shared river systems, right? So how do climate change driven water shortages impact geopolitical tensions such as between India and Pakistan or India and Bangladesh?
As you rightly said, water is already a major flashpoint in South Asia, and climate change is making it worse.
Yes.
We are talking about a region where rivers like Indus, Ganges, Brahmaputra are lifelines of hundreds of millions of people.
Yes.
So when water supply becomes unpredictable due to glacial melt, erratic monsoon seasons, or prolonged droughts,
Mhm.
it feeds directly into existing geopolitical rivalries.
Yeah.
Take India and Pakistan, for example, the Indus Waters Treaty, which has endured wars and political crises since its signing in 1960,
Mhm.
effectively managing the distribution of the Indus River system's waters between the two nations, right?
Yeah.
But recent developments, have put the treaty under significant strain. In August of 2024, last year,
Yes.
India formally issued a notice to Pakistan seeking a review and modification of the Indus Waters
Mm.
Treaty, citing concerns over shifting population
Yeah.
demographics, India's agricultural demands, and the urgent need to accelerate towards clean energy development.
Yeah.
And India argues that the treaty, while historically significant, disproportionately benefits Pakistan and inadequately addresses modern challenges like climate change.
Yeah.
While Pakistan, on the other hand, has expressed reluctance to
Mhm.
amend the treaty, emphasizing its importance as a cornerstone of bilateral water sharing
Mhm.
agreements. Pakistani officials have conveyed a willingness to listen to India's concerns,
Mm.
but they have not committed to
That's right. Yeah.
renegotiating that treaty.
Mhm.
And this divergence in perspectives has led to further diplomatic tensions, with both sides wary of setting precedents that could impact their respective water treaties. India and Bangladesh also have similar concerns over the Tista River, with Bangladesh arguing it's not getting enough water during
Water.
the
Yeah.
dry season. So there is an absolutely real danger
Danger.
here that is climate driven water scarcity could turn into a zero sum game where
Mhm.
countries see water
Yeah.
as a national security issue rather than a shared resource.
Yeah, I think in the past, the River Ravi, for example, has been seeing a low level of water, but in some during monsoon season, sometimes we also hear from the news, oh, India just kind of flushed the water into the and that's gonna destroy our crops and it's gonna flood in the towns and during that time, I mean, countries do that and it's kind of a flashpoint to kind of go into a full blown conflict. So, as you know, this region also has like one of the highest numbers of people who live under the below the poverty line, and agriculture based economies. These are not very industrialized economies. So, in agriculture disruptions due to erratic monsoon and weather conditions, as you know, during 2022 floods, for example, it does threaten food security issues. So, how could this contribute this unrest, migration, climate refugees, or even conflicts in the region?
So, food security, as you rightly said, is deeply linked to political stability,
Mhm.
right? So, if people cannot afford basic necessities,
Exactly.
protests are going to become inevitable.
Yep.
South Asia's food systems depend on monsoon patterns, which are
They do.
becoming unpredictable.
Mm-hmm.
When there is extreme weather, whether it's droughts or floods, it disrupts agriculture. That
Yeah.
ripple
Yep.
effects are massive.
Mhm.
I don't know if you've been following this, which I'm sure you are if you look at climate change issues.
Yep.
In India, for example, the farmer protests have
Yes.
already
Oh,
shaken the
yes.
political landscape.
Yep.
Now, imagine a scenario where climate shocks repeatedly devastate crops,
Hmm.
they drive up food prices, and they
They do.
fuel mass discontent. The
Yeah.
same goes for Pakistan and Bangladesh, for
Mhm.
example. When food
Yeah.
becomes scarce, we are likely to see
To
increased
see.
migration
Yeah.
from rural areas to urban, which puts more pressure on
Pressure.
our
Mhm.
already fragile cities.
Yeah.
But what is the worst case scenario here? Food shortages
Yep.
could contribute to cross border migrations.
Mm-hmm.
It could increase cross border tensions, particularly
Tension.
if one country is accused of hoarding supplies and
Mm-hmm.
restricting trade. And for extremist groups, food insecurity can then become a tool for recruitment,
It does.
offering desperate communities a sense of security in exchange for support.
Mm-hmm.
So, climate change does not just threaten the environment,
Yeah.
it threatens political and social stability in ways that could reshape the region's security landscape.
Yeah, and I think especially in Bangladesh, and we have seen, climate refugees, and a lot of people leave the towns and come to the city. Dhaka becomes one of the most densely populated cities in the world due to rising sea levels, right? Because those areas are gonna flood, and there's gonna be they're not gonna be livable anymore. So, in South Asian nations, how can they respond to the security and the humanitarian challenges posed by the climate refugees? Because we still are very divided. It's very kind of tension, right? And so recently, we saw in Bangladesh, the unrest, and that some people accused India, backing Hasina and things like that, and the regimes in the region. So how can we do it in a way that, like, hey, we need to respond as a collectively, because there is no zero sum game. Nobody is the winner here. Everybody loses if this poses a bigger challenge to a humanitarian way or climate refugees.
Absolutely, Dr. Ittifaq. South Asia is already a hotspot for climate-induced migration, and Bangladesh is a great example to give. Right now, there is no legal framework to deal with climate refugees.
Yeah.
And it's so funny and ironic that international law does not even recognize them as refugees. While
Mm.
we have a global dialogue on climate
Yes.
change,
Yeah.
the climate related migrants and refugees are not even recognized in the international law framework. That means that South Asian countries need to take a lead in crafting regional
Yes.
solutions. And this
Yeah.
could basically mean three things. Number one, we need to invest in climate resilient infrastructure to slow displacement.
Yes.
Developing legal pathways for
Mm.
internal as well as cross border migration to prevent humanitarian crisis. And thirdly, to strengthen regional cooperation because no single country can handle this alone.
No, no
So
one. No,
if,
that is
yeah, so
true.
if South Asia does not prepare now, we
Mhm.
will see a future where climate migration becomes a major source of conflict between
Yes.
within countries and across borders.
Yes.
So we need to come together
Yeah.
as academic and research communities to start a track two conversation
Mhm.
between regional experts so that it can feed into track one and policymakers can make things happen. And I have been talking to some regional partners, and we as University of Lahore want to take a lead in bringing together a group of experts at the track two level to
Mhm.
talk about climate change and security related issues.
Yeah, so as you know, it's a region where more than 2 billion people live, and it's very volatile, hostile, and in terms of climate, it's not very friendly either. But on the other hand, if we see, for example, the U.S. Military, they have their plan for adaptation, how they're gonna go about it. A lot of other countries do, and our militaries are still focusing on a lot of other issues, and they might not be prioritizing, and they may be prioritizing. I'm not super familiar with for example, how South Asian military forces are adapting to climate change, or even if they think it as a threat, because we know in over South Asia region, these military forces do help during earthquake, during flooding, during those time of crisis. So are they adapting, and are they integrating any resilience into the national security strategies?
I think it's a great question, Dr. Ittifaq. I don't think we are there yet, but there is a growing recognition that climate change is a security threat.
That's good.
Adaptation is slow and happening unevenly across South Asia. In Pakistan, you know that military plays a major role in a
Yeah.
disaster response,
Mhm.
whether it's flood relief or
Yeah.
earthquake recovery. Same in India and
Yeah. Yeah.
Bangladesh. But integrating climate resilience into long term defense planning, that is a work in progress.
Mm.
One major shift we are seeing in military forces factoring in climate risks to infrastructure and operations, right? For example, rising temperatures and glacial melt are affecting high altitude border deployments.
Mhm.
I'll give you a critical example of Indian and Pakistani military presence on the Siachen Glacier, the
Yes.
highest altitude battlefield in the world.
The world. Yeah.
Both countries have maintained military outposts on the glacier since 1984, despite extreme environmental and logistical challenges. However, climate change is making that situation even more precarious.
Mhm.
There are rising temperatures which are
Yes.
accelerating glacial
Yeah.
melt, which
Yes.
is going to threaten and destabilize that terrain,
Yeah.
the risk of avalanche, disruption of water flows that millions downstream rely on. So, for India and Pakistan, maintaining military presence in Siachen is not just about territorial control, but it's also about national prestige and strategic signaling.
Yeah.
However, we're seeing that the environmental cost is severe.
Yes.
As climate change intensifies, troop sustainability in these high altitude conditions will become extremely difficult.
Difficult, yeah. More
And there will
expensive too, yeah.
absolutely, there'll be increased risk of hypoxia, frostbite, logistical challenges in supplying remote outposts.
Yeah.
There has been some research that has come out which has argued that both countries need to explore demilitarization of glaciers
Mm.
through diplomatic
Yeah.
agreement, turning Siachen into a climate protected zone rather than a contested
Yeah.
military frontier.
Hmm.
But we have deep
Yeah.
seated and ongoing tensions which make a resolution unlikely. But beyond India and Pakistan, what is missing is a regional strategy.
Hmm.
Climate change does not respect borders,
No, it does
and
not.
the
Yes.
forces need to work together
Yes.
on
Yeah.
disaster response, resource management, as well as humanitarian assistance.
Yeah.
The question is whether political tensions will allow for such a
Hello.
conversation to happen.
Yeah, it is sad that it's jeopardizing billions of people's future on this planet and the planet for the future generations. And I wanted to ask you, like kind of another question about around floods and earthquakes and how these military corporations can be used. But you already touched on that question, so I will now be asking that for our viewers to kind of get the maximum out of it. So, for example, given the increasing competition, over Arctic route, energy resources, because we still rely on a lot of dirty energy solutions, we do not go for a clean energy or for a clean, renewable energies yet, as many other countries are progressing. And of course, strategic trade routes are very important in this region. So, what are South Asia's geopolitical risks concerning climate change?
I think another important question. South Asia's reliance on maritime trade is increasingly jeopardized by climate change,
Mhm.
particularly through rising sea
Sea
levels
level,
that
yes.
in major ports like Mumbai and Karachi.
Hmm.
And there has been research out there which projects that by the year 2100,
Hmm.
Mumbai could experience a sea level rise ranging from, zero point 0.2 to 0.86 meters, as well as Karachi projected sea level increase from 0.11 to 0.82. Now,
Yeah,
what does this mean for your viewers who
yeah,
might not, be following the sea level rise
yeah.
projections so carefully? It means increased flooding in cities,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So Mumbai and Karachi could be underwater
Water.
during
Yes.
high tide, storm surges, or extreme weather events.
Yes.
It also, leads to mass displacement and climate refugees. So those living in, Karachi and Mumbai in low-lying areas of Karachi, for example, DHA Phase 8,
Mm-hmm.
Clifton, Kurangi, and Mumbai's Worli, Kolaba, and Bandra regions
Mm-hmm.
could be forced to relocate.
Yeah.
Internal migration crisis will happen. And as both Karachi and Mumbai are financial trade hubs, you could
Yes,
see
they are.
economic
Mm-hmm.
disruptions, right?
Yeah.
They handle a significant portion of South
Yes.
Asia's imports and exports.
Yes. That is
You can
true.
also see increased health risks,
Mm-hmm.
saltwater intrusion into
Mm-hmm.
freshwater supplies,
Yeah.
leading to contaminated drinking water, loss of agricultural land, waterborne diseases.
Mm-hmm.
There is a whole host of issues.
Yeah.
So these projections, they are not just abstract scientific concern.
No.
They that Karachi and Mumbai could become increasingly unlivable
Yeah.
for millions by the end of this century
Yeah.
if we don't take adaptation
Yes.
measures,
Yes. And we are not.
right?
And we are not. Yeah.
The second part of your question about the Arctic angle.
Mm-hmm.
So the melting ice is opening new shipping routes,
Yes.
which
It
means
is.
that global trade patterns are going to shift.
Yes.
If China, Russia, and Western nations, and US start prioritizing those Arctic routes,
Mm-hmm.
then what is going to happen to your traditional Indian Ocean route,
Yes.
right? And
Yeah.
in the trade that takes place through Indian Ocean.
Mm-hmm.
South Asian economies are front facing that
Yeah.
threat and new vulnerabilities. There's
Yeah.
another attended risk, which is on energy security.
Mm.
Climate policies worldwide are pushing a transition away from fossil fuels.
Yeah. It
But
is. Yeah.
South Asian economies rely on coal and oil.
Yes.
If
Exactly.
global supply chains change too quickly,
Yeah.
you could see energy insecurity becoming a major, major issue. So
Yeah.
we need to be more proactive in South Asia rather than reactive in
Yeah.
shaping climate resilient trade and energy
Yeah,
policies.
absolutely, absolutely. I think it's not like we're talking about a discussion which is like not happening. We have been seeing the vulnerabilities, the risks. Global reports have indicated about the region and especially about Karachi and Mumbai. And as you are one of the person who also doesn't do only academic work but also a lot of policy work, right? So you kind of write policy papers and guide governments on the policies. So on a policy level, both at a national or regional level, would you suggest that like a better integrate climate resilience in South Asia's security framework?
Absolutely. Like I said in some of my responses, that we need a regional strategy.
Mhm.
So I think number one, we can develop regional climate security mechanisms. How about thinking about a South Asian climate security forum,
Mhm.
which can bring together governments, militaries,
Yeah.
scientists to coordinate their responses?
Yeah.
Secondly, we can think about strengthening transboundary water sharing agreements,
Yes.
right? Climate driven water scarcity, we have
Mhm.
talked about,
Yes.
needs diplomatic solutions,
Mhm.
not military standoffs.
Yeah.
Thirdly, we can invest in climate resilient infrastructure.
Mhm.
From flood defenses to climate
True.
smart
Yeah.
agriculture, adaptation is the key. And as Dr.
It is.
Adil Nasser, who has extensive research on
Yeah.
climate change,
Hmm.
calls it, we
Yeah.
are in the age of adaptation to the change that we are already experiencing.
Yeah.
Climate change is
True.
not coming, climate change
No,
is here,
it's
right?
here. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and lastly, but not the least, these are just some of the things that I think policymakers need to hear. Incorporate climate risks into defense planning.
Yes.
Military forces need to prepare for climate-related
Yeah.
disruption. Overall, where we are headed in South Asia, we need a shift in the mindset.
Yeah.
Climate security is not a future problem.
No,
It
it
is a
is not. Yes.
and it needs a all hands on deck approach. It needs a
Yeah.
regional.
Absolutely. So thank you again for your insight and for your time. It was honor to kind of talk with you, honestly,
Thank you so much for
because I
having me.
think we do not have many experts and people who are already in academia who take these issues seriously, who are impacting our securities, our water systems, food systems, our politics, and even our economies largely in South Asia. So I appreciate that so much. We have to leave it there. We will have another kind of discussion maybe in the future.